In 1971, Ford released a brand new compact car. It was small, it was cheap, and Ford marketed it as costing just $1 per pound. And it was called the Little Carefree Car. Suffice to say, this new compact gained popularity very quickly. But little did America know that this car contained a dangerous design flaw. It would end up causing explosions that resulted in multiple deaths and injuries. But the worst part of it, Ford knew about the problem. But it chose to ignore it and instead aggressively rushed it into production. Today I'm talking about the Ford Pinto, one of the most tragic car engineering failures in American history. In 1972, a woman named Lily Gray was happily driving her new Pinto hatchback down a California freeway. As she was merging lanes, her car suddenly stalled and coasted to the middle lane. The car immediately behind the Pinto swerved out of the way. But the next car behind that, a 1962 Ford Galaxy, was unable to avoid collision and rear-ended the Pinto. The impact drove the Pinto's gas tank forward and caused it to be punctured by other car parts. Fuel started spraying, also gasoline vapors rapidly spread into the cabin, and the Pinto instantly caught on fire. Sadly, Lily Gray died a few days later, but there was another passenger, a 13-year-old boy named Richard Grimshaw. Fortunately, he survived, but he suffered disfiguring burns over 90% of his body. Richard's family sued Ford. It would later be revealed that the car stalled because the carburetor fluid had become so saturated with gasoline that it suddenly sank, opened the float chamber, and caused the engine to flood and stall. During the trial, it was also revealed that the gas tank had been designed to sit right behind the car axle. That made it especially vulnerable to critical damages and rear-end collisions. But the saddest part of it all is the tragedy could have been avoided. Richard's lawyer started digging into the case. He stumbled on some dark secrets that exposed Ford in ways that no one could have imagined. He uncovered evidence that Ford had known about this weakness with fuel tank design all along, but Ford had done nothing to address it. Let's rewind a bit. We have to go back to when Ford was developing and testing the Pinto. In the late 1960s, compact car sales were soaring. At the top of the chart were Japanese and German imports. In fact, Japanese compacts like the Toyota Corolla and Datsun 510 were on the rise. And American companies like Chevrolet and Chrysler wanted a bigger piece of the compact pie, and so did Ford. Ford needed a low-priced car, and fast. So, in the summer of 1967, it started initial planning for a brand new subcompact. It would be called the Ford Pinto. Actually, it was named after the Pinto horse, in line with their tradition of naming cars after horses, like the Mustang and the Bronco. Ford's then Vice President Lee Iacocca didn't want the car to be an ounce over 2,000 pounds, and they didn't want it to cost a cent over $2,000 either. In today's dollars, that would be about $14,000. The original plan was to release the Pinto in 1971, but it didn't happen. Actually, they released it earlier than scheduled in 1970. From conception to delivery, the Pinto was completed in just 25 months. That was a huge feat back then, because the automotive industry's average was 43 months. This made Pinto the car with the shortest production schedule in automotive history at the time. In September 1970, the Ford Pinto officially went on sale. Its tagline was, "The Little Carefree Car." And the release date wasn't the only goal Ford met. They proudly met their target price. Entry-level models of the two-door sedan was priced at only $1,850. That undercut GM's Chevrolet Vega and gave Ford a price advantage. And it would also directly compete with imports like the Mazda 1200, the Subaru DL, and the Honda Civic. Did you know that in 1971, Ford even printed an advertisement brochure that could be cut out and folded into a 3D model of the Pinto? Not only did the Pinto get clever marketing, but it also had some pretty clever features too. Take, for example, its hatchback model, which came out in 1971. It had exposed chrome hinges for the liftgate, 5 decorative chrome strips, a fold-down seat, and a large rear window. In 1972, Ford redesigned the window to be even larger. The glass portion of the hatch was enlarged to take almost the entire side of the hatch itself. All these features and more made this car unique and exciting for consumers. The marketing was successful, and Pinto became a best-selling subcompact. Road and Track magazine praised the Pinto's 1.6-liter Kent engine. Superstock magazine deemed the Pinto's fit and finish to be superior, and Car and Driver magazine said the Pinto was a powerful commuter car with good visibility and a sports car feel. But it wasn't unanimously positive either. The Pinto received criticism for substandard drum brakes, which were caused a serious deficiency. But if you think negative reviews are bad, well, the PR for this car was about to get much, much worse. So bad it would later end up on Forbes' list of the 14 worst cars of all time. So, what happened? 3 words: exploding fuel tank. When Ford was developing and testing the Pinto, Ford discovered inherent problems with the fuel tank design. In low-speed rear-end crashes, the filler neck would tear away from the sheet metal tank and fuel would spill out on the ground. Also, it turned out that the bolts in the differential and nearby brackets were able to easily puncture the tank. There was even a test report where everything in the tank emptied out in less than a minute after an accident. Internal company documents showed that Ford had secretly crash tested the Pinto more than 40 times before it went on the market. And in every single test where speeds exceeded 25 miles an hour, Pinto's fuel tank ruptured, creating a risk of fire. The engineers cared, so like any safety-first engineering team, the engineers proposed solutions to Ford. One option was to borrow a design that Ford already used in the Capri. Here, the tank would just sit above the axle and out of the way. Another option was to install tank shields to prevent punctures, and to install reinforcements around the filler to prevent tearing. Today, car companies are more safety-conscious than in times past, and solutions like these are easily accepted by management. But back then, things were different. At least they were at Ford. When engineers proposed the solutions to the management team, instead of receiving a thumbs up, the management asked, how much will it cost? Did a cost-benefit analysis. Turns out that fixing these problems would cost an extra $11 per car. That would have come out to $113 million in total, including the cost for parts, engineering, and production delays. On the other hand, the cost for damage payouts and injury claims for severe burns, repair costs, and mortality would be projected to be only $49 million. The tragic thing is that public safety wasn't Ford's priority. Their priority was to get the car out to market as soon as possible. So they went full stream ahead and released the model as is with the exploding gas tank. So now you're probably wondering if any of the Ford employees spoke out about this. One employee at Ford at the time said that speaking up meant, and I quote, the person would have been fired. Safety wasn't a popular subject around Ford those days. With Lee, it was taboo. In fact, it's a known fact that Lee Iacocca literally said, safety doesn't sell. Anyway, later, when all this came out of the media, Ford was heavily criticized for putting a dollar value on human life. And that wasn't the only thing Ford was hit with. Ford also got slapped with lawsuits, and lots of them. Remember, 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw? Both the Grimshaw and Gray families filed tort action lawsuit against Ford. In the end, the jury awarded $2.5 million to the Grimshaws. They awarded almost $560,000 to the Grays. And finally, they fined Ford a whopping $125 million in punishment for their conduct. The number was chosen for a very specific reason. It was because it exceeded all profits Ford had made on the Pinto. Ford appealed the judgment, and the court reduced the award to punitive damage of only $3.5 million. Then Ford tried to get the punitive damages thrown out entirely. The court denied that request because it felt that Ford had knowingly endangered the lives of thousands of Pinto owners. The Grimshaw versus Ford case became infamous in Ford's history and caused many customers to abandon the company altogether. But Lily Gray and Richard Grimshaw weren't the only people who were harmed because of their Pinto. Another major lawsuit against the company happened 1 year later in 1978. This lawsuit is known as Indiana versus Ford Motor Company. Three girls were happily riding along on their way to church volleyball practice on their dusty 73 Ford Pinto. This was 16-year-old Lynn Ulrich, her 18-year-old sister Judy, and their 18-year-old cousin Donna. They had just filled up the Pinto's gas tank, but then Judy, who was a driver, peeked in the rearview mirror and noticed the gas cap cover was wide open. So she turned on her hazard lights and tried to pull the car off to the side. Unfortunately, she didn't know a 2-ton van was behind her. And its driver, 21-year-old Richard Duger, was trying to light his cigarette, and he didn't see the Pinto in front of him. You can guess what happened next. The two cars collided and the Pinto burst into flames. The two sisters died in the car. Cousins succumbed to her injuries in the hospital. The Ulrich family sued Ford, but in this case, Ford was found not guilty. But later in 1980, the company agreed to a $7,500 cash offer for each of the Ulrich girls. That's worth about $26,000 in today's value. All in all, there are officially some 27 deaths tied to the Pinto, but some estimates are much higher. Some sources stating that the death toll was in the hundreds, and that's just the death toll, so those numbers don't even include people who suffered injuries but survived, like Richard Grimshaw. By 1977, new Pinto models incorporated a few minor alterations deemed necessary to meet federal standards. And in 1978, all Pintos from 71 to 76 were recalled. They were then upgraded with the originally proposed shielding and reinforcements. But it was 8 years too late. Some 2.2 million vehicles had already been sold, and countless lives had already been lost. Also, 30,000 Ford Mercury Bobcats were recalled for similar fuel system modifications. Later that same year, GM recalled 320,000 of its 76 and 77 Chevrolet Chevettes for similar fuel tank modifications. Ford also changed the advertisements for the Pinto. For example, one of the radio spots that included the line, "Pinto leaves you with that warm feeling." With all the legal attention, needless to say, people felt differently. So Ford's ad agency, J. Walter Thompson, quickly dropped that tagline. For years, Ford struggled with a stained reputation for putting profits ahead of build quality. While they did win the Indiana case, they never completely regained the trust of the American public from that generation. Ironically, this drove consumers to foreign competing brands that didn't explode. Although the Pinto started out as a carefree car, it proved too much of a headache. Ford discontinued the model 10 years after it was introduced. The Grimshaw case not only impacted Ford, but it also changed America as a whole. That case sent a message to the automakers that if they deliberately ignored safety considerations, they were taking the risk of financial and PR consequences. This was one of the cases that helped push the American car industry to pay more attention to safety. It seems Ford learned its lesson because their cars today are some of the safest on the road. For example, several Ford cars, trucks, and SUVs earned 5-star overall safety ratings from the NHTSA last year. We can say Lee Iacocca was wrong because obviously safety does sell. But now you tell me, how safe do you feel in a Ford? Do you know anyone who ever had a Ford Pinto? Please share your experiences by commenting below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.